Thank you. My name is Jack Abid, and I'm giving a presentation on remote working and Zoom. You're doing it wrong. Again, I'm a patent attorney with the law firm of Allen, Dyer, Dobelt, and Gilchrist. I possess degrees from the Georgia Institute of Technology and Electrical Engineering and Jackson University in Physics. I received my law degree from the University of Florida Levin College of Law. Allen, Dyer, Dobelt, and Gilchrist has secured over 7,000 patents over the life of the firm for our clients, and been counsel for litigations in the number of 1,000 since 1990. And with that, I'll get started on the presentation. So the essence of the task at hand is that you have to provide secure access for lawyers and paralegals to firm resources. And you must maintain the confidentiality of those resources. The core resources are generally located physically within the physical footprint of the law firm, whereas currently with COVID-19, most of staff and attorneys are not located or co-located with these resources. So the connections are made via a secure conduit enabled via one of several software options. Generally, a robust encryption is required to make this as secure and to maintain the client files confidential, and this is done in one of several ways. A very common approach is Go to My PC, which provides a proprietary yet secure encrypted conduit from a remote computer to a local computer to the local database, which is generally where the firm's confidential files are hosted. Or in our implementation, sometimes a remote computer to a local computer to a terminal server to a local database, depending on the networking makeup of the law firm office. Another approach is a virtual private network, very common. Our firm uses Sonic Wall Net Extender, and it's a remote computer to a terminal server to a local database. Again, the key feature here is that you maintain confidentiality of the communications, the encryption of the communications, so they're not out in the open, so to speak. The ethical implications of this type of remote work. Rule 4-1.6, confidentiality of information, governs the release of confidential information related to the representation. And generally, lawyers are not to reveal this particular information. There are exceptions, one being the crime exception, and that's a very common, or not the most common, but a very well-known exception to the confidentiality requirement. But more importantly, going to the comment to the rule, paragraph E requires a lawyer to act competently to safeguard information relating to the representation of a client against unauthorized access by third parties and against inadvertent or unauthorized disclosure by the lawyer or other persons who are participating in the representation of the client or who are subject to the lawyer's supervision. Again, this comment to this rule makes it clear that the lawyer must maintain the confidentiality of the client's information, and this applies to any subordinates, anyone that the lawyer is supervising during the representation. Now, how this relates to remote work comes in the next comment, the next slide, excuse me. So the factors to be considered in determining the reasonableness of the lawyer's efforts include, but are not limited to, the sensitivity of the information, the likelihood of disclosure if additional safeguards are not employed, the cost of employing additional safeguards, the difficulty of implementing the safeguards, the extent to which the safeguards adversely affect the lawyer's ability to represent clients, again, rendering perhaps, for example, by making a device or important piece of software excessively difficult to use. The client can require additional safeguards or waive the requirement of reasonable efforts, and same reasonableness standard is applied to transmitted communications. Again, adding in the sensitivity of the information, the extent to which privacy of the communication is protected by law, by confidentiality agreement. So again, this is just the bar laying out factors to determine whether you're doing enough to maintain the confidentiality of the information. And there's a multifaceted test to determine whether it's you're making reasonable efforts and adhering to your ethical obligations. And although it's not in the comment, I suspect that the last factor, the extent to which the privacy of the communication is protected by law or by confidentiality agreement, and the extent to which the safeguards adversely affect the lawyer's ability to represent clients, is a carve out or attempted to create a carve out for email. So email is ubiquitous and generally is not encrypted when you're sending out emails. It's generally in the clear and it's routed between you and the client. Now, there's an understanding that when this goes through the internet that perhaps people aren't looking at this, but generally it's not a secure email if it's just a typical email. There are secure email platforms out there, but most people do not use them. And so because of that, if you were to say that was unreasonable, that was not reasonable effort, it would render email unusable, which would be odd because overwhelming majority of lawyers out there are using it. This brings us to video conference technology. It's another form of communication. The same rules for reasonable efforts apply to maintain confidentiality. Generally, video conferencing applications use point-to-point encryption, which is most likely going to be part of it. The reason why it's reasonably secure and you're taking reasonable efforts to maintain the confidentiality of information that's being disseminated during the video call. But of course, that's not the reason why you came here. You know, most people are coming to this presentation for Zoom pointers, which brings us to the first rule of the video conference. Try not to use the restroom while you're on a video conference. Here's a famous example of how it can go wrong. As you see, the person we're looking at is in the middle row, far left. She's doing, the first issue is that she's moving around during a video call, which can sometimes cause discomfort to people and give people motion sickness. So you should not do this. That's the first thing. Number two, you shouldn't use the restroom while you're actually at going to the bathroom. It just doesn't work out so well, as you can see here. But there's also a couple of other issues with this call, or this video Zoom conference. And we'll get to them later on. So video conference options. Hello, fragmentation. So let's Zoom. So of course, Zoom feels like it's ubiquitous and that everyone has it, but it's not the only option out there. The three most popular options are Zoom, GoToMeeting, WebEx, and maybe Google Hangouts far behind at number 4. But there's, as you can see, there's a lot of options out there. There's at least 2 options from Microsoft, Apple FaceTime, Amazon Chime, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, proprietary options, RingCentral, Adobe Connect, iMeet. Obviously there's a lot of options out there. So with all those options, which should you choose? Generally, client requirements may drive this particular decision. You know, your client and their IT department may require that you use WebEx or Zoom or a Microsoft product. Another thing is widespread familiarity is a good thing. So generally, I wouldn't recommend you deviate from the top 4 if you can avoid it, or something from Microsoft. You don't want your clients, you don't want your participants to be struggling with installing software if at all possible. The cost, some of these options have a free plan, Zoom and WebEx do, with limited functionality. And then of course there's some functionality that's unique to certain vendors. Breakout rooms allow you to split your meeting into multiple separate meetings that are separated and confidential from the other group. That could be helpful, for example, in mediations. Zoom has that feature and it's relatively unique. The ability to record is another feature that might be unique depending on the platform you're using and whether it's cloud-based or local-based. Whether you can dial in via a typical landline is another nifty option that not every one of these systems offers. WebEx, Zoom, and GoToMeeting offer these features. And data jurisdiction preferences, which is a unique feature to Zoom, which allows you to control where your data is stored and transited within your Zoom account. If you want to keep it out of certain jurisdictions, that is an option, and we'll go through that option in detail. So the type of Zoom meeting. So there's two primary types of meetings, and this applies to WebEx also and GoToMeeting. There is the typical run-of-the-mill meeting, which is the collaborative two-way communication approach, where everyone can speak and everyone can share, has the ability to share the desktop, annotation, collaboration, all those type of stuff. The whiteboarding is very common. And then there's the webinar mode, which is different. It's for a large number of attendees. You know, depending on the vendor, I know Zoom scales up to 10,000 attendees, and it allows you to manage those attendees. And because of the large number of attendees, you don't want everyone to speak, so not everyone has microphone capability. You have to ask for permission. There's host controls, so you would raise your hand, so to speak, virtually, and then they would allow you to speak. That way you can control the flow of the conversation and only allow a very certain number of people, limited number of people to speak during your webinar. Again, and there's different, depending on the platform you're using, there's branding options, registration options, monetization options, but all sorts of nifty things you can do when you go to the webinar side of these meetings. But generally, most people are using the more run-of-the-mill meeting features or the meeting style or mode of operations, excuse me. So typical limits of a Zoom meeting. So the free plan can host up to 100 participants, which is actually pretty flexible. It's a pretty, many free plans don't allow you to go beyond just a couple of attendees. There's a 40-minute maximum for group meetings, and one-to-one meetings are unlimited. If you go up to the cheapest paid plan, you can host, again, up to 100 participants. You have unlimited group meetings, social media streaming, cloud recording, and data preferences. This, again, the jurisdictional election where you can keep your data in a certain country of choice or preference, depending on the laws of that country. Of course, no concurrent meetings. That's the #1 rule. So the no concurrent meetings feature is kind of a way for Zoom, WebEx, and GoToMeeting to prevent people from multiple users on the same account effectively. There's only one meeting at a time. So you can't have Bob and Jane can't both be sharing the same account and have a meeting at the same time. They wouldn't allow that. And if you do that, this is the image your attendees will get. So it's, again, it's understandable rule, but you have to be aware of it and not make sure you don't schedule concurrent meetings because they both cannot begin at the same time. Even if you pass hosting responsibilities off to one of your attendees and jump onto another one, you can't, that same account cannot support a second meeting at the same time. So you need to end one meeting before you go to the next. So this brings us to audio competency, which is a nice way of saying familiarize yourself with and where the Zoom button is located. The second rule of Zoom being, when in doubt, mute yourself. And again, it's all over the place. It's in Zoom, for Zoom, it's actually in at least 4 spots. And the reason it's there is because it's probably the most popular feature or button that's used by Zoom users. And it also helps, just quite honestly, for a better meeting. If most people Zoom on the Zoom or whatever video conference you're using are muted, it improves the audio quality. So the reason the mute button is everywhere is they don't want you to be shy. You should be muted unless speaking. Don't be that person who's mucking up the meeting with background noise, children, pets, distractions. If you have a Zoom account, you can set the default entry to be muted and turn off video when you enter into a meeting. And you shouldn't enable it until your environment is prepared. You know, you got a quiet environment, or if you're going to have background noise, you can just listen. So this brings us to the meeting settings. If you have a Zoom account, you have a local software installation where you can review your meetings that are upcoming, and you can adjust the privacy and security settings for these meetings. And under the advanced options panel, you'll find that there's the passcode, the waiting room, enable join before host. The waiting room is actually quite nifty and was introduced with the recent Zoom bombing issue. Effectively, people, when you enable the waiting room, when people join your meeting, they won't go into the meeting. They'll go into a queue, and you as the host will have to release them into the meeting. So it prevents someone from jumping into your meeting without permission. The enable join before host allows people to start the meeting without you, which if you know you're going to be late for a meeting, it's not a bad idea to do that, so your participants can get started without you. The account settings is, the odd thing about Zoom is that there's the local install of the software, and there's also the cloud account. They're connected, but the settings aren't the same. You can access different settings when you log into the website. And one of those is the data center or data jurisdiction preferences. You can select the data center where your hosted data will be stored. And you see the default is that China is not selected and Singapore is not selected. And of course, the United States is pre-selected, but you can pretty much direct where you want your information to be. And it's an option only on paid accounts for Zoom. If you have a free account on Zoom, you don't get this option. So it brings us to hardware concerns. Likely, your existing PC has a built-in mic and camera, but it's also quite likely that your existing PC microphone and quality are pretty much subpar. Currently, 1080p is pretty much table stakes to have a decent looking Zoom video. And because of that, I generally recommend people invest into a decent external video camera and headset. I'm currently using a headset for this presentation. The directional microphone is helpful in that it limits background noise, and a wireless headset like I have allows you to move around if you need to. If you have a long meeting and you want to stretch, stand, or do anything and still be part of the meeting, you can do that. Of course, if you do that, that brings up whether you should disable video, which I'll cover in the next few slides. So appearance. Zoom court is court. Virtual meeting does not relinquish an attorney from a professional appearance. So you should avoid super casual attire, t-shirts, not wearing a shirt. I think that should go without saying, but apparently Florida attorney did appear shirtless for a Zoom hearing. So a 1080p camera, like I said earlier, is great. It shows for video quality, but it also brings out the fact that you in personal hygiene said bye-bye 4 months ago, because of the pandemic. If you're working from home, perhaps you haven't been in the office since March. So the bar is low, but please do get out of bed. It is a Zoom meeting. We're not expecting you to wear a bow tie and a coat, but do put on something. And again, this brings us to professionalism handbook for the Florida bar, which lawyers display reverence for the law, the judicial system, and the legal profession by acting with respect, decorum, and courtesy. They earn the trust of the public and help us preserve faith in the operation of the fair judicial system. Again, it's not a rule, ethics rule, but it's a professionalism handbook, so it's kind of a suggestion. Again, parents got a little bit of national attention because a Broward Circuit judge, Dennis Bailey, wrote a letter to the local bar association, and in his letter, he has some choice comments, and I'll go through that now. One comment that needs sharing, and that is the judges would appreciate if the lawyers and their clients keep in mind these Zoom hearings are just that, hearings. They're not casual conversations. It is remarkable how many attorneys appear inappropriately on camera. We've seen many lawyers in casual shirts and blouses, no concern for ill grooming in bedrooms with a master bed in the background, etc. One male lawyer appeared shirtless and one female attorney appeared still in bed, still under the covers. And putting on a beach cover-up won't cover up that you're poolside in a bathing suit. So please, if you don't mind, let's treat court hearings as court hearings, whether Zooming or not. Again, this got some national coverage, and again, because of some really bad actors, outliers. Most attorneys are dressing appropriately for Zoom hearings, but there's been some outliers and they have gotten a lot of attention. Of course, here's an example of a government meeting in Brazil where one of the attendees showed up shirtless. So it's not just in Florida. It's not just Florida, man. It's all over, it would seem. So the third rule of Zoom, wear pants. As you can see here, see, get this video going. And can't hear it, unfortunately. I apologize. Audio is not working for some reason. But as you see, voila. This gentleman right here ended the meeting, didn't stop the video. It's very bad. That's another point of good practice. Well, when the meeting ends, end the meeting. Conclude the meeting on the local software so audio and video sharing stops. So this brings us to appearance, virtual background. So virtual background is a relatively nifty feature. It's not unique anymore to Zoom, although I think they were first. Basically allows you to put forth a fake background. Like currently, I am not in San Francisco, but it looks like I am. And depending on your hardware or what platform you're on, you may be able to do the virtual background without a green screen. I currently don't have a green screen. It's using, the algorithm is using edge detection to figure out what's me and what's the background and replace it. So if you look at the video of me, clearly you'll see there's a little bit of an issue around the edges of my jacket. And that's because the algorithm is trying to figure out where I end and where I start. So going without the green screen is the most likely option. If you want a higher quality virtual background with sharpness around the person, you have to have a green screen. And yes, if you get one, you can buy them dirt cheap on Amazon, but you have to have a support structure. So make sure you get the support structure. So the virtual background is a double-edged sword. So yes, it hides your background. If you have a cluttered background or you just want to maintain privacy of your home or wherever you're at, it is good. But then people you will get judged on your choice of background. So choose a plain background if possible. Stock Zoom backgrounds like the one I'm using are pretty much safe. And you want nothing distracting because you are the point of attention. And if you have a entertaining background, it will distract people. And it just extends, it's more of a distraction to extend the meeting unnecessarily long. And again, if you're going to use your actual background, do take a look at it and see how you appear on a Zoom meeting beforehand. And if you need to remove things like toys, and I at one point had a Darth Vader replica behind me, and you couldn't see him, but you could see him over my shoulder. And I had an inventor during a conference call point that out. It looked like Darth Vader was hanging on my right shoulder, which was kind of interesting. Funny, but I don't have that issue anymore because I'm using a virtual background. So, and again, you could use a very nifty background such as the TNG bridge of the Enterprise, but again, it's distracting. If people are going to be looking at all the awesome details of Star Trek, so don't use that. Unless it's not a professional environment. And if it's just a friendly Zoom with friends, feel free to use that. So make sure your rig supports it. The virtual background is pretty neat, but it requires a lot of processing power. And a lot of computers don't support that. And the standards are different depending if you're using the Mac client or the Windows client. So you may find that, I have a virtual background option for my Mac, but it only works with a green screen, which is a lot easier on the processor. You don't have to do any of those edge detection, it's not as hard to do edge detection with a green screen. So for example, my Mac at home can only do a virtual background with a green screen, which means no virtual background for me. So I have to select where I'm going to be much more carefully than I have to do at the office, where I have a PC that can support the virtual background without the green screen. And sometimes, depending on how old your computer is, you may not be able to do a virtual background even with the green screen. And the standards and requirements are different depending if you're on a Mac and a PC. I really don't know why that's the case. But it is the way it is. That is currently the state of affairs with Zoom. And of course, no matter where you're at, you remember you can always just dial in from a landline, a cell phone without using video, and it makes life, and you don't have to worry about that. Again, back to the background. Backlight is the most common error I see in Zoom meetings. You don't want to have a lot of light behind you during a meeting. It makes for terrible photos and also makes for terrible video. It makes for poor video quality, so you want to avoid windows and other sources of bright light. You want the window to be behind the camera, if at all possible. And that's why I'm not a fan of the car. The first video I showed you with a poor lady went to the restroom. One of the people in the conference was in their car. And I would ask you, what's the point of turning on video if you're in your car? Just leave audio on and turn off video. I mean, the reason being because there's a lot of windows around you and it's bright. It's going to cause backlight issues. Not to mention you can't really control the environment around your car, so you could have distractions, which is to put it politely. So make sure the light is directly facing you. Place the window behind the camera. Keep your camera eye level so it looks like you're talking to people. You know, if the camera is above you or below you, or you're, you know, it's going to be distracting. It's going to make people think like, feel like you're not paying attention to them. And just like in real person, if you do that in a Zoom, it's hard to maintain people's attention. So also another nice feature about Zoom is they have a touch-up feature. So if you got 5 o'clock shadow, you can turn that on and it'll soften it up. You know, it's a pretty neat feature, you know, if you feel like you're going to need it. Again, yes, the client is judging you just like the circuit judge in Broward County. If you're in bed, on a couch, at a beach, clutter, other items, you're going to be judged. And it's perhaps not fair, but it is part of your presentation. You know, you have to treat a Zoom meeting with a client as if it was a real meeting with a client. And would you come to a real meeting with a client in your conference room with clutter all over the place? You wouldn't. And you wouldn't do it at a beach. You wouldn't do it in bed. It's not professional. So if you are in bed, you can just turn off the video. So eliminating those distractions lets other participants know that attention's on them. It's a good thing. So back to processing power. So mitigate the strain on your system. So Zoom, even if you make those requirements, for example, on a virtual background, Zoom is just in and of itself is a processor intensive and bandwidth consuming application. So you should close unneeded applications, particularly power hungry applications, browsers, Chrome with a bunch of tabs is not a good thing to have open in the background. So if you don't, also video in and of itself, again, if you're not ready for video, turn it off. And you really don't need it, even if your background's fine and you look fine, turn it off if you don't really need it, because it does create a strain on your system. Particularly if you have a poor internet connection. If you enable video, your audio quality may take a dive. So you should always eyeball the quality of service that you're getting and disable video if you need it, because that frees up a lot of bandwidth for your computer, and it may enhance the quality of your audio. So if you're finding your audio starting to show problems, disable video first and see if you can survive just on audio. And also a hosting tip, you have control with the participants panel, so you can disable video and you can mute people if you feel like you need to. And if you see someone's quality is dropping off, perhaps because their bandwidth isn't good, disable the video for them and they'll thank you for it because they'll be able to hear you. Again, if you don't need video, just disable it. And of course, if you're sitting outside in the Florida heat with a laptop, it's already going to strain with Zoom. You may not want to have that on your lap in the heat while running Zoom and a virtual background. It's going to get warm and it's going to be uncomfortable. Perhaps not on fire like the one you see on the slide, but it's going to be uncomfortable. So please pay attention. Again, yes, people can tell if you're multitasking. Make sure you actually look at the camera and make eye contact with participants while talking. Align the camera and the placement of the Zoom window to be aligned vertically so it looks like you're talking to them and you're naturally speaking to the people that you're talking to on the Zoom. And yes, if you're one of 15 people on a Zoom and you're telling me I can't check Twitter, yes, because people can tell there's a certain eye movement, and you know there's a lot of people are on Twitter and we really know what's going on. If you're scrolling IG on your iPhone and you're on Zoom while you're on their iPhone, yes, we know you're scrolling IG. So people can figure that out and it's distracting. So in that instance, I would just tell you to disable video and just go audio only. You know, again, a recurring rule, mute, disable video, if at all possible. And also close and lock your door. Oh. Again, a little late on this meme, but yes, the eyes. This is the reason why people know you're not paying attention. They see your eyes moving back and forth, and it's very common during Zoom calls, and it makes it very clear that you're not paying attention. So lock the door. So this is a famous video from BBC News about 2 years ago. It's not so much a Zoom video call, but it's the same rule applies. Lock your door and control your environment, because this can happen. Your child may barge right in and interrupt you during your very, very important BBC interview. And then you have to maintain, your attention while your wife comes in and takes the children out. So again, yes, lock the door, but the reason is to control your environment. You're not gonna have anyone walking in during your call or during your Zoom call, and it allows you to maintain your attention on the call. Punctuality, so don't be late. It's rude to be late in the virtual world too. So actually, if you're a host, try to be early for the meeting. And if you're not a host, still be early, because it allows you to check your audio and video settings. So you can see if everything looks good. If you need to make any adjustments, perhaps you decide to turn off video. And you should test your meetings before every meeting. And because unfortunately, as a software update that may have happened automatically without you even being there, may have been pushed by Microsoft onto Windows, or by your IT department, may actually break one of your devices. And again, this is another advantage of the fallback of calling in. If your audio is not working, you can always use video separately and then call in to provide audio. And that's, again, these are things you can figure out if you call in 5 minutes beforehand. If you call in right as the meeting is beginning, while you're working that stuff out, everyone's waiting. And conclude meetings on schedule, because multiple meetings back to back is the norm for a lot of attorneys. You want to make sure you conclude them when they're set. So if you feel it's going to be a 2-hour meeting, then make it a 2-hour meeting. And also, if these meetings are on your account, like we said previously with the concurrent meetings, you don't want to have 2 running at the same time. You can't. So one meeting ends, you need to end, and if you want to have that second meeting, one needs to end on time. So it also just shows the respect for participants' time. No one wants to be stuck on a 2-hour call if it was set for like an hour and a half. So Zoom bombing and security generally. So Zoom bombing got a lot of attention nationally at the start of the COVID pandemic, although I feel like it got more attention than it deserved, because Zoom provides several security features that make Zoom bombing less likely, if not impossible. But the first thing you should do is don't make your meeting details public. Don't put your password and meeting number anywhere publicly. Make sure they're only accessible to the people that are actually going to attend the meeting, should be there. I would enable the waiting room if you can. Again, it allows people to queue up if the host is late. Meeting passwords are a good thing, although as I understand, Zoom is about to make those mandatory, so you will you'll become familiar with them quite soon. For sensitive meetings, consider locking the meeting once attendees have connected. So as a host and the participants panel, once your attendees are there, if it's a sensitive meeting, you should lock the meeting. It prevents anyone from joining the meeting who hasn't already joined. So if someone gets knocked off, that person can rejoin, but no one new can join. So you won't have anyone eavesdropping, or someone inadvertently gets that Zoom information or has access to your account, they won't jump onto that call. Limiting attendees to signed registered users is another feature. And again, that's another advantage of actually registering an account, even if it is a free account with Zoom. If someone engages that feature, you can actually join the meeting. It does inhibit the usability, because it means everyone's got to have an account. If they don't have the account before your meeting, they have to set that up and register an account, which can be an annoyance. So another feature is you might want to disable video if the meeting is only going to be audio. If most of the people are there via audio or calling in, you should disable video anyways. It's less problems. It's another point of vulnerability in the meeting. And generally where people want to cause disruptions if they're not supposed to be there is via video. Be cautious with screen sharing permissions. If you do make someone else the host or the presenter, they have the authority, and they can do almost anything. They can push people off the meeting, they can share anything they want. And although you can reclaim hosting privileges, there is a delay. So I would be careful about who you make a host. And disable chat. It has not been uncommon for unfortunate things to be said in the chat. If you're not going to, most people don't use chat, and you can always just disable it. And you can disable it in the meeting after the initial start of the meeting, because a lot of people use chat to work through audio issues or connection issues. So don't disable the chat when and if you can. Manage your meeting. So disable video for non-presenters. There's no reason for someone who's just listening and watching to actually have video. It's just a distraction. Not to mention it adds more video boxes to the screen, and it makes it puts more strain on everyone's system. Use poll questions to engage participants. That's more for the webinar side, not so much the meeting side. Monitor the chat function for questions and for audio issues and technical issues. If you have a noisy participant, mute them. And the participants panel is your friend, because that's effectively the control panel of the Zoom meeting. You can see there's an icon next to each person who's speaking with their name, and you can use that to decide whether you want to mute somebody. For example, if they have background noise or something of the sort, and maybe they don't realize they're not muted, you can mute them for them. And you can also, there's a mute all, and mute all if you want to just silence everyone. And there's also the participants panel. You can boot disruptive participants, but that's not really germane to the client meetings that lawyers mostly have. Again, participants panel is your friend. You can monitor people, see if you lose anyone, mute people, all, disable video for people, rename people who call in, because it can be hard. You got 10 people calling in, and sometimes even if they're on a call in, you're not going to have their name associated. You can actually name them so you can know who's speaking and who's talking. Again, waiting room control and admission into the meeting, breakout rooms, and where you can make a participant host. That's all in the participants panel. So that you should really familiarize yourself with that, because that's a lot of functionality right there. And it changes almost on a monthly basis with Zoom doing software updates. Some final pointers. If you're the host, stay online until all attendees have logged off. And leave the meeting running if people wish to continue without you. Again, don't violate the 2 rules at the same time rule, because again, they'll end that meeting. If you're one of these attendees, do not assume the meeting is confidential. It could be being recorded. So if you are not the host, and for example, you jump on a Zoom call with opposing counsel and they set it up, get off that meeting before you have your confidential discussions. You should have your own conference call, your own Zoom meeting that you control. Disable collaboration features that are not needed. It could be a problem. Set a profile picture. You know, a lot of folks, they turn on video because they don't want this black box sitting there where they're supposed to be. And so a profile picture will just show up instead, and that they know who is speaking, and they have like a visualization of you. And again, so they at least can see you, even if you're not live, they can see a picture of you. Be cognizant of movement. You know, if you move around left and right, up and down, it changes the angle, the camera angle, and it can be distracting for your participants. So try not to move if you're talking as little as possible. Although I'm sure when I look at the video for this presentation, I'm sure I've bounced all over the place, which I apologize for. Again, remember the first 3 rules: no bathroom, mute yourself, and wear pants. But it's just all really comes down to mute yourself and turn off video if at all possible. And oh, one last caution: multiple sequential meetings. This happened to me just a couple of days ago. I had multiple sequential meetings. I ended one, and I went to start the next one. I selected the wrong meeting, you know, and by doing that, I booted everyone off the new meeting or the second meeting, and that was a bit of an unfortunate instance, but it can happen. So just be careful with the panel. And that should be it. So that ends my presentation. If you have any questions or any suggestions, or I just screwed something up, feel free to email me. My email's on the front slide, javed@allendyer.com, and I really appreciate everyone's time today, and